It is midnight in the city of London, and a young girl named Sophie is making sure all the doors and windows of her orphanage are properly closed, because this is the hour known as the witching hour, when people go missing. As Sophie takes all the precautions, the shadow of something massive lurks through the town. While the rest of the children at the orphanage sleep, Sophie stays up in her bed, reading. The orphanage cat suddenly spots something and slips out onto the balcony. Curious, Sophie follows the cat outside and sees a giant man standing in the street. The giant notices her. Scared out of her mind, Sophie hides under her blanket, but the giant reaches into the orphanage and grabs Sophie along with her blanket. Carrying Sophie in his enormous hand, the giant begins making his way out of town, avoiding being spotted by anyone through a series of clever, sneaky tricks. Once out of the town, the giant takes off across the countryside, leaping with his long legs, each stride sending the ground trembling under his feet. Then, boom, he takes a massive leap into the air and disappears into the clouds. On the other side of the clouds, they arrive in a strange land. The giant carries Sophie into his strange house and hangs her, still wrapped in her blanket, from a hook. The giant begins chopping vegetables for a stew. Sophie, terrified, tries to escape when the giant isn't looking, but she knocks something over, making a loud racket, and the giant hears her. The giant looks at Sophie and speaks, "You can't escape unless you've got wings." Sophie, trembling, asks, "Where are they?" "They're in giant country." The giant answers with a grin. Suddenly, loud thumping footsteps are heard outside. More giants are nearby. Sophie begs the giant not to eat her, tears welling in her eyes. The giant laughs, a booming, hearty laugh, and says, "Eat you? I ain't no cannibal monster. I'd never eat a child, never." Sophie frowns, "But you're still a monster. You stole me." The giant's expression softens. "I feel awful about that. I do. I can only imagine how upset your mom and dad must be." Sophie's face falls and she whispers, "I don't have parents. I'm an orphan." The giant scratches his head awkwardly. "Ah, well, sorry about that too. But the other giants out there? They ain't like me. They'd gobble you up without a second thought." He leans in closer and adds, "And they're huge. Compared to them, I'm just a runt." Sophie's voice shakes as she asks, "Then why did you bring me here?" The giant sighs. "I had to. If I didn't, you'd tell everyone about me, and the humans would lock me in a zoo." "I swear, I won't tell anyone. Please, just take me home." Sophie pleads desperately. The giant shakes his head. "Can't risk it. You're staying here now, for the rest of your life." Angrily, Sophie retorts, "If you won't let me go, I'll run away." The giant's tone turns serious. "If you leave this house without me, the other giants will sniff you out and eat you alive." Suddenly, the giant pulls out a jar filled with a strange, glowing blue light. Sophie stares in disbelief and asks, What is that?" "It's a dream," the giant replies proudly. Sophie scoffs. "Dreams aren't real things." The giant chuckles to himself and begins flipping through Sophie's book. Before long, Sophie drifts off to sleep. Once she is sound asleep, the giant walks deeper into his house, where shelves filled with jars of glowing lights shimmer in the darkness. He grabs a jar with a bright red light and starts working on it, muttering to himself. Hours later, Sophie wakes up to find the giant fast asleep. Heart racing, she tiptoes to a nearby window and slips out. She runs as fast as she can. But before she gets far, a shadow looms over her. Another giant, much bigger than the first one. "Help!" Sophie screams desperately, thrashing and kicking. But from his cave house, the friendly giant hears her cries and slowly closes the door with a heavy creak. He's helpless. The massive giant flips Sophie into the air and swallows her whole. But then, whoosh! Sophie wakes up with a gasp, realizing it was all a dream the friendly giant gave her to prove that dreams are real things. The next morning, the giant is drinking a fizzy drink and Sophie notices, wait, what? The bubbles are floating downward instead of upward. "That's not how bubbles work," Sophie exclaims. The giant grins and says, "Bubbles that float up make nasty burps." Sophie wrinkles her nose. "But if they go down, I bet they come out in a much worse way." The giant shrugs and lets out a huge burst of gas, launching himself off the ground like a rocket. "Woo-hoo!" he shouts, thoroughly enjoying the liftoff. Just then, boom, one of the massive human-eating giants shows up. The friendly giant whispers urgently, shoving her behind some vegetables. Sophie scrambles inside a giant vegetable, just as the other giant sniffs around, eyes glinting with hunger. "Ooh, I hate vegetables!" The friendly giant groans, tricking the other giant. "I only eat human beings." The big, mean giant sneers, but eventually leaves. Sophie narrowly escapes being eaten. Afterwards, the friendly giant takes Sophie deeper into his cave house. "Time to clean up," he says cheerfully. He gives Sophie some clothes to choose from. Sophie picks a red jacket she finds, slipping it on. The moment the friendly giant sees her in it, his expression turning almost sad. He gently places her in a comfortable room nestled inside a tree and says, "I've got to go out now. Catch some dreams." Sophie's eyes light up. "I want to come with you." "No," the giant says firmly. "It's too dangerous." While the giant is gone, Sophie looks at the jars of dreams, watching them swirl and shift, taking different forms inside the glass. Her curiosity gets the better of her. She insists stubbornly when he returns. The giant sighs but finally gives in. "All right then, but stay close." They step out of the cave house and find all the vicious giants sleeping nearby. Tiptoe, tiptoe. They try to sneak past, but uh-oh! One of the giants wakes up and grabs the friendly giant by the leg. Sophie yelps and dives into a broken, rusted car to hide. She watches in horror as the vicious giants toss the friendly giant around like a ball. They throw him against rocks and trees, laughing and bullying him mercilessly. Suddenly, it starts to rain. The vicious giants scream in fear and run away. They hate water. The friendly giant wastes no time. He grabs Sophie and tucks her inside his bag. But as they run, Sophie's blanket slips out of the bag and lands on the ground. The giants sniff the air, catch the scent of her blanket, and realize the friendly giant is hiding a human. Oblivious to the danger behind them, Sophie and the giant arrive in a beautiful place the giant calls Dream Country. Sophie looks up in wonder. The stars above shimmer like diamonds. On nights like this, the giant whispers, "I can hear music from the stars with my big ears. I can hear insects talking in the dirt, ladybugs walking on leaves, and plants having their secret chats. I hear it all, the world's hidden whisperings." Sophie gasps as she notices the reflection of a giant tree in the still water nearby. The giant points to the reflection and smiles. "Once someone called me the big friendly giant." With that, the BFG leaps into the water, entering another dimension. He waves at Sophie. Sophie takes a deep breath and jumps in after him, finding herself standing with the BFG beneath the tree of dreams. "Look," the BFG points excitedly to a golden dream swirling just out of reach. "That's a rare one. I've got to catch it." He lunges for the dream, but it slips away every time. Then the dream slows down near Sophie. The BFG says in amazement, "Listen, I can hear your voice inside it." The BFG gently places the golden dream into a jar, carefully labeling it Sophie's dream, until she stumbles across a red one. "A nightmare," the BFG warns, grabbing the red dream before it touches Sophie. "This one's full of regret. It shows people the terrible things they've done and makes them believe there's no forgiveness." The BFG's face turns serious as he carefully locks the nightmare away. With their work done, the BFG takes Sophie out of the dream dimension and sets off again. As they walk through the night, Sophie says softly, "From now on, I'll call you BFG." The giant smiles warmly. "I like that." They make their way back to London, silent streets glowing under the moonlight. There, the BFG pulls out his giant trumpet and softly blows happy dreams into the houses where people sleep. One by one, windows flicker with peace and joy as the dreams drift inside. And Sophie, watching from the BFG's shoulder, can't help but smile. He narrates the happy dreams for Sophie, and she loves them. As they walk back home, a shiver runs down Sophie's spine as she spots all the other giants heading out to hunt for human children to eat. "We have to figure out a way to put an end to this," she exclaims. But then, during their intense conversation, they suddenly realize that Sophie dropped her blanket back in Giant Country. The BFG's face hardens into a serious expression, the weight of the situation dawning on them both. After some time, Sophie wakes up in front of the orphanage, disoriented and confused. The BFG, looming above her, says gravely, "Because you dropped your blanket in Giant Country, the other giants now know about your existence. You're no longer safe with me." Sophie protests fiercely, "We can stop the other giants together." But the BFG shakes his head, his expression turning somber. "Let me tell you a story. Once, I took another boy to Giant Country, just like you. That boy saw me, and I had to take him too. The red jacket you found, it belonged to that boy." His voice drops, heavy with regret. "When the other giants found out about him, I didn't bring him back in time to save him from their wrath." Sophie's heart sinks as he concludes, "I won't make that mistake with you. Goodbye, Sophie." He turns away, leaving her with tears in her eyes. Sophie sits on the balcony of the orphanage, calling out to the BFG, knowing his giant ears can still hear her. To prove her point, she takes a leap off the balcony, trusting he'll catch her. And, at just the right moment, the BFG catches her effortlessly. Together, they return to Giant Country, the urgency of their mission burning in their hearts as they begin plotting a plan to stop the other giants once and for all. Just then, the vicious giants arrive, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground as they start searching for Sophie all over the BFG's house. They wreck his precious work, chaos erupting around them. Sophie narrowly avoids being spotted, her heart racing, but finally, the BFG decides he's had enough. He charges at the vicious giants, wielding a flaming rod to chase them out of his home. Meanwhile, Sophie hides in the room the BFG made for the last boy he brought to Giant Country. She spots a picture of the Queen on the wall, and her mind sparks with an idea. We can create a custom dream for the Queen, one where the giants are shown eating children, and the army steps in to stop them. Together, they concoct the perfect dream, one that includes Sophie and the BFG, ensuring the Queen will listen to them when she wakes up. They arrive at the palace and blow the dream toward the Queen while she sleeps. The Queen awakens, her eyes widening as she processes the dream. "This is curious," she tells her assistant, because children have been mysteriously disappearing across the country. As the Queen's assistant moves to close the curtains, he suddenly spots Sophie standing there. The Queen gasps in recognition. She knows Sophie from the dream. "Your Majesty," Sophie pleads, rushing forward. "You have to listen to me." The Queen, her expression shifting from disbelief to understanding, nods. "I believe you, dear child." Sophie then introduces BFG to the Queen, who awkwardly makes her acquaintance, his giant frame towering over everyone in the room. Next, the Queen informs the generals about the threat of the giants while setting up a lunch for the BFG. The lunch turns into a hilariously awkward affair as the BFG's giant mannerisms clash with royal etiquette. He even makes the Queen and all her servants and generals try fizzy drinks, resulting in an uproar of incredible gas that sends everyone into fits of laughter. After the laughter dies down, the BFG leads the royal army to Giant Country, determined to create a dream of regret to give the other vicious giants. This way, they would wake up feeling remorseful and be easy targets for the army to capture. Sophie and BFG sit together, discussing Sophie's golden dream. "What is it about?" Sophie asks, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "It's your dream of a normal life," the BFG replies gently, "and you will have it. But not here in Giant Country. You must go back to your world." Sophie's heart sinks a little. "Will you still hear me whenever I call out to you?" The BFG simply points to his massive ears, a warm smile spreading across his face. As the time comes to blow the dream toward the giants, the BFG suddenly realizes he's forgotten his trumpet back in London. In that moment of distraction, Sophie grabs the dream jar and carefully tiptoes into the middle of the sleeping giants. With bated breath, she prepares to open it, but just then, one giant starts to wake up. Sophie panics and manages to break the jar, releasing a wave of regretful dreams that fill the remaining giants with remorse. But the huge one remains alert and lucid, and he is about to attack Sophie. But just in time, the friendly giant steps in, defending her with all his might. The giant readies a punch aimed at the BFG when the royal army bursts onto the scene, their weapons drawn, stopping him in his tracks. With coordinated precision, the royal army captures and restrains all the vicious giants, finally freeing Giant Country from their terror. The vile giants are carried away to a remote island, a desolate place from which there is no escape, doomed to eat nothing but vegetables for the rest of their days. Back at the Queen's palace, Sophie wakes up and is greeted by the Queen's assistant, and Sophie smiles, relief flooding her heart. Meanwhile, the BFG now has Giant Country all to himself. He's growing a garden full of delicious vegetables and working on writing a book about all his adventures. Back at the palace, Sophie smiles and whispers, "Good morning, BFG," knowing full well he can hear her wherever he is. And sure enough, he responds with a gentle chuckle, his heart warmed by her words. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like our channel and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. Also, let us know what movie you would love us to recap for you.